Well, thank you very much for that very kind welcome, and it's really great to be here with you. And actually, I know more about this place than you may realise, because I began life when I left school at 16 as a GPO engineer before it became BT up in Bradford in Yorkshire, actually. And there's always this, I'm going to just get someone to just turn that down a bit because it's just echoing a bit. There's always this story about stone where eventually when you got high enough up you go to this course at Stone and you climb telegraph poles, and that's all allowed. I never arrived because I left to become a clergyman, but it's really great to arrive at last 40 years later. And so very interesting. Yeah, the world around us is profoundly changing. As we've said, we were in the House of Lords very late last night talking about the structures of the EU. But what I'm about to say to you, by the way, could apply to very big things like that. It's not about size, it's about mindset, and it's about whether things work in practice and in detail. It may well be in the EU, the thing that will define it is whether that very, very large organisation is capable of securing our borders and is actually to prevent those children in June falling into the sea and drowning, which appear on all our television screens. If they're there or if they're not there, may have a very profound effect on what happens in this referendum. It's about the devil and the detail. So I wanted today to just talk about a place, a street, and a piece of city. What does transformation actually look like? What does all these words we're beginning to talk about here this morning actually mean for real and in detail and in practice? Because I listen to lots of words from politicians at 60,000 feet who've not necessarily built anything in their lives and have no idea. Part of my speech last night was precisely that point. It is one thing to sit on committees talking about Europe. It is another thing to try and run a business and trade in that arena. Quite a different experience. The devil and the practical detail matters. The world, and you all agree, is profoundly changing around us. Massive shifts are happening between the public sector, the voluntary sector, business. Very, very big things are going on. And how do we begin to get hold of that changes and be part of it? Because either we will, or in 5 or 10 years' time, you won't be. The world is profoundly changing. I'd like to share with you some practical stories about the micro, because my view about life is that the way into very big things is actually to understand very small things really, really well. So a place. So I left the GPO and became a clergyman. And 32 years ago this year, I got invited at the time of the Anglican report, Faith in the City, to take responsibility for a small rundown church in a place called Bromley by Bow, in the middle of a rundown housing estate, where 97% of everything was run by the state and nothing worked. And you had the highest indices of unemployment, poor health, mental ill health, all that stuff. It was in the Independent at the time, all these numbers. Canary Wharf hadn't been built at that time, so there were 2 buses a day at that time down to the outdoors. And today, of course, you've all seen Bromley by Bow, because we've been on every television screen in the world, because the Olympic Stadium is 150 yards from our site. But 32 years ago, this was a very different world. It was the time of the Anglican report, Faith in the City, and there was all this debate going on about urban priority areas and what should the churches do with our 55,000 buildings all over the country in some of these areas. And if I'm honest, I read that book in the early days, and it was full of academics and theorists talking about poverty who'd never built anything in their lives. And one of my early responses was to throw it in the bin, no use to me. And after I'd done my little induction, and the next day I'm stood in this empty church hall on my own, wondering, what on earth am I doing here? The question arises, what on earth do you do about this set of circumstances one is now in? Answer, I haven't got the faintest idea. One thing as a Yorkshireman that did occur to me is, do a run now, Andrew. Get the hell out of it. There's no chance. Indeed, maybe I become like other people I began to notice in those early days that by year 5 were falling off their trolley because it had all become too much. Or Philip, the Jewish head teacher at the primary school across the road, he's retiring early because it's all too much for him. What do? Stay in my bed every morning and get depressed is one option. All too much for me. The other option is to hide away in my study and become an expert on poverty and write a doctorate on it all as a way of becoming an expert, as a way of avoiding Karen and her children on the 7th floor of a tower block across the road. Because if you engage with her, you get involved in all the messy stuff. And I've noticed over the years how the public sector and civil servants, I've had a lot to do with civil servants over the years, love reports from well-meaning academics full of very complicated things who've never built anything in their lives. And I noticed that Tower Hamlets Council was stuffed with all these very expensive documents that didn't make the slightest bit of difference to Karen and her children. Become an expert, write a doctorate. The other option as a nosy Yorkshireman was just loiter with intent and wonder what on earth is happening in this rundown housing estate. Get to know some people. All the networks of this church and the pubs actually all breaking down. How do I reconnect with the people who live here? So I began to loiter purposefully with intent. And I came across the voluntary sector at that time. And what did I see the voluntary sector doing? Well, they bought into a religion, really. I'm in the religion business and I know how it works. And religion had moved out of the churches into an army of charitable workers who worked in poor communities in the East End of London. And the religion was something like this: public sector charities good, business greedy capitalist pigs. And actually when Tesco's moved across the road with 300 jobs, this was all seen as terrible. The capitalists are taking over. And actually, the more one began to watch the behaviour of all of this, the more I began to worry about it. So when Tesco appeared with 300 jobs, this was all seen as terrible. And we had 43% unemployment at the time. Actually, getting a job, getting a welfare, earning money, getting up at 8 in the morning might not be a bad thing, actually. But what was the relationship between us and Tesco? Good question, I thought. Loiter with intent, you came across organisations sitting on management committees, drinking coffee, reading The Guardian, with lots of ideological ideas about the world, lots of religion going on, but often consolidating the poverty of the area. They weren't into innovation, actually. They were into following government. And I found over the years, if you face government, you become like it. If you face Karen and her kids, and think about them and absolutely focus on them, something different begins to happen, like businesses have to do. In those early days, I met a guy called Paul Preston, who was bringing McDonald's into Britain. You might hate McDonald's, but at that time no one had heard of McDonald's. But what I did notice is that Paul Preston was focusing in a little place in Woolwich, worrying about one shop. And he was worrying about where do you get the chairs from that you can drag across the floor 600 times a day without the leg falling off? Where do you get the tiles from that don't crack by month 6? How do you get the fresh meat there every morning, the same meat every morning? How do you make one shop work in very great detail effectively before you build 2,000 or however many it is, I don't know, a lot? He understood as a business entrepreneur that the detail in one place really, really matters. Yet as I began to meet politicians and others across the country over the years, talked equality and fairness and all this yatta, they thought you could build 200 new schools, 200 new health centres before they'd understood in detail how one worked. And if you stay around long enough in these housing estates, we've stayed 32 years so far, and you watch these programmes come through, actually what you begin to see is by year 7 it's all falling through the floor and half it doesn't work. And of course the politicians moved on somewhere else. We began to worry away about the religion that was being played out in our own sector, in the public sector and around us. But what do you do about it? Well actually, fortunately, I had 12 healthy East End people all over 70. Ethel Wheatley was 73 in her body, but 17 in her head, I began to notice. These are good people who are not politically correct and haven't been to university, but have lived through a war and seen a few things in life and were not stupid. And we began to talk about, the church has been there 147 years, unless we do something pretty quick, we're out of here in 2 years' time. The money falls through the floor. So we decided, why don't we just give this building away to anyone who turns up and say yes to people rather than no? Let's not consult them, let's not ask them, let's just gossip and just open up opportunity. We agreed. What have we got to lose, said Ethel. We began to do that. And by gossiping, 30 odd years ago, a woman called Janet turned up in a sports car with very sharp hair. Now this was the time when Dave Ken Livingston was running the GLC and holding seminars on racism for dustbin men. Complete waste of time. And actually a good day off actually, but didn't do anything to deal with the race issues and the violence we were dealing with in Bromley by Bow, I noticed. And Janet had 3 kids and wanted to build a dance school, and I had an empty hall. And I began to say to her early on, because I realised I've employed lots of people in my life, and you get 2 types of people. You get people who add energy and purpose to your organisation, and you get those who suck it all away. And I began to realise I needed energy, you know. And she had sharp hair, and she had a sports car, and she had purpose. And I said, okay, Janet, I've got a rundown, derelict, empty hall, but I do have it. And I have a bank account with £400 in it. So I have a bank account, and I do have 400 quid. So actually, I'd like to form a partnership with you. And I don't want to just rent you a bit of a space, as the voluntary sector of the churches do, and have nothing to do with you. No, I want a partnership with you. And I'm going to help you build your dance school in an area where nothing works and mediocrity is rife and the public sector run everything and you've got to tick a box before you can breathe. Actually, we're going to make a really brilliant dance school happen. One thing that is really, really good, and I'm going to work with you because I need to rebuild my relationships with the mums and dads and kids of this community. Let's shake on it. Not lots of papers and contracts, let's just shake on it. We agreed. And by the way, I am going to charge you a bit of rent because I need to get my £400 going upwards rather than downwards. We began this little journey. Within 6 months, before anyone had talked about social enterprise all those years ago, bits of the voluntary sector jumping up and down. So this is terrible. This woman's going to charge these children. Yes, she is. There are no grants. It's the early 80s recession. Let's see what East End parents want to buy with their own money. Because I was visiting them. I was baptising in their early days their children. And I was beginning to discover that East End mothers are not stupid. They care about their children. They want the best for their children. And they realised that Jana hadn't taught the theory of dance at a college somewhere. She'd been a professional dancer. She'd done television with the ships in Covent Garden, and she knew about the disciplines necessary to get into the dance business. By year 6, we had 150 children. A West Indian child's been offered a place in the Royal Ballet. There's dance, there's theatre. It's too big for our old rundown hall. It moves on the new site on the Isle of Dogs with 6 staff. A micro little example of those who said they represented the community and knew what the community wanted, and what the community wanted to buy with their own money was a quite different matter. And I began to realise that as you open that box, all sorts of people came out of the woodwork that once weren't sitting on voluntary sector management committees. As that began to happen, we had 2 children, one very young, and there was no decent nursery care, and Tower Hamlets at that time had an education system as a basket case. I mean, Newham, Tower Hamlets and Hackney were all basket cases, actually. Full of process and nonsense, actually. And what do you do about your kids when you move out? But actually, we were realising we better move in, actually, because it gets personal, you know. Are you going to put your kids into this? But let's also get real about it. We can't just ignore their education. And by loitering, I came across a group of families with a guy called Steve Good, an individual, who had a passion about children and play, doing it in one of their living rooms, actually, and needed more space. And there were these people I kept discovering wanting to do stuff, but the systems were completely ignoring. And so as I got to know them, I said, look, you know, there isn't any decent nursery care around here. I've got, next to where Janet's doing the dance school, there is this rather nice church room. Why don't you come and have a look at this for the nursery? So they came along, and I showed them this big trust. So because you imagine, I'm sort of when I first arrived, standing in this pulpit giving words of wisdom to 12 elderly people sitting in a 200-seater church, sitting where they'd always sat, and it looked as though the dead had been carried out and no one noticed. Was that sort of room? And you know, that isn't a sustainable model, yeah? So they looked at this, and one of these, I like EastEnders because they like Yorkshire people, they're a bit blunt, and she said, well actually, you can't afford to maintain this building, why don't you move out and we move in? And I said, well actually, why don't we form a partnership? Why don't we just put an act together? And why don't we get in an architect, Gordon, a small little practice who's starting to get going in architecture, and come up with a plan? What's the plan? The plan is, let's rip out the whole of this building and paint the walls white ourselves. We can all get a pot of paint and a roller. I can order a little sander, we'll sand the parquet floor. When you do that, it comes up like new, it looks really sparkling. And let's put a tent-like canopy made in the middle of it, as the same material as the Millennium Dome, but 15 years earlier. And let's build a beautiful church in the round for 40 people rather than 200, a bit more realistic when a third of the population now Muslim. Let's build a little art gallery around it for some of the artwork, because I was coming across artists. When you loiter, you discover stuff. Individuals. She, a single mum stuck in the Bowbridge estate, stained glass artist, got a little child. Actually, Sheena, you need a decent studio. I've got empty Sunday school rooms. Let's do a deal. It's all about deals. Great. And by the way, everything you sell, I'll take 10%. We'll put it in our £400 and we'll invest that back in the project and we'll all benefit from it. Absolutely. Oh, and by the way, I was looking for a decent nursery place for my child. Could you come into this nursery? Absolutely. If you help me with your creative thoughts, redesign this church, because bring artists in, they may know more than other people. You know, all interesting ideas. Let's build a church and art gallery. Let's develop the first integrated model of nursery care in the country. That doesn't say, following our 1970s liberal theories that we learned at university when people have ever done it. Let's take 30 of the most vulnerable and challenged children in this community and put them in a space. I said, no, let's not. Think about 30 of the most dysfunctional adults you've ever met in your life, and think about spending a week in a room with them. Why would you do that with children? And actually, I watched Labour councillors talking equality and fairness, putting their kids in a posh nursery in Walthamstow. The real challenge to me and Dr. Sam Everington and some others who are popping up at this point was, would we put our children with Karen's children? Would we personally buy in to this business we're going to build? And by the way, would we pay the going rate because we can afford to? So let's create a business model where each child is costed up. And maybe we'll take some from social services from the risk register that social services will pay for. But it's a business deal we're going to do, and we'll pay for our own kids. And you create a business model that makes a little profit at the end of the month rather than loss. Yeah? And actually, any profits eventually made can go back into this whole thing, and an interesting set of circumstances. We created the Balsawood model for 200 quid. It was only going to cost £70,000 to build, not a lot of money. And the expert 31 years ago from social services arrived. And she's quickly telling me that you can't do all this. I'm an expert in childcare, you know. And she pulls out of her bag like an encyclopedia of 1,000 reasons why nothing can happen in the world. So we have your interesting conversation with the state, yeah? And I've got East End mums there, at which point they're becoming very frustrated because they can't do anything in the world until they've ticked a box. And nothing is possible, yeah? It's all treacle. So I said, stop. I am a clergyman in the dissenting tradition of the churches, and I have not forgotten, as most of my colleagues have, what non-conformity is about. Non-conformity is about when the rules don't work, you break them. Yes. Yeah? That is what John Bunyan was about, not far from here. That is what Martin Luther King was about. That was the whole history in the Christian churches. We've all become far too conformist. Oh, you can't be doing that around here. I said, I want to see your directives. It's about being bold. I want to see, I'll get my director down and tell you why you can't do that. Get him down here. So this bloke came down here. Fortunately for me, he was the first more entrepreneurial mindset I'd met at that point in the public sector in East London. And he quickly said things like, Andrew, do you know, you can tell you within 3 minutes, it's all about individuals. You know, get real, it's about people. Andrew, you know, I could build 10 of these for the cost of a very expensive one I just built on the Isle of Dogs. Can we move the baby sleep on the top? Absolutely, John. We built the first integrated model of children's services in the country, actually, with a little business model that did make a profit. And actually a set of relationships began to happen, and a certain culture that started to go like that, rather than this. And suddenly local people said, hang on a minute, we've been made loads of promises by councils and all sorts of people that never happened. These people promised us a nursery, and now our kids are on that. And what about if we take over the derelict land, 3 acres of land where people are injecting on the light behind this building and do something with that? And I said, well, funnily enough, Sylvie Pearce has just arrived as the chief executive of Tower Hamlets, trying to sort out this basket case. And by the way, we've got now a little cafe just beginning in town. Why? Well, we didn't have any cold water in the building and any decent kitchen facilities. Now I was going to put naively put a kitchen in, because you can be naive, you know, you've got a nursery at the kitchen. Yeah? And a young woman through the nursery called Sue Fox, who lived in a town block just down the road, said, well, actually, I've always wanted to build a cafe, actually. And I watched her eyes and thought, she wants to do this, actually. So I said, okay, Sue, I'm going to do a deal with you. But we've got another empty little room. We're going to build a little cafe together. Not a boring one with crap coffee and all of that stuff. No, we're going to get a gadget machine and decent coffee, yeah? And we're going to build it of really nice wood with a carpentry I've discovered. And we're going to get a red ribbon from Wales, so it might only have 12 seats, but you'll want to come. And we'll call it Pie in the Sky, good name for a church-based cafe, yeah? And we'll make this work. When you make that work, by the way, all Sue's mates begin to, yeah? And you begin to discover, by the way, through this kind of a logic, that the way into this housing estate is not, let's consult the residents and ask them what they want. They've got the faintest idea what they want. They've only tasted 3 bottles of wine on the bottom shelves of Tesco. Go to the top shelves, show them the best stuff, and you get a rather more interesting conversation. This idea, this is what civil servants do, asking people what they want. You know, this is nonsense. Successful businesses in this country did not come in asking what people want. They pioneered new ideas. Steve Jobs and Apple, did he go around asking, do you want Apple? You have no idea what Apple is. He invented something and millions of people started to use it. Yeah? There is a challenge here to our logic. This buying into the state and its religion, you know, gets you in some daft places. You know, we began to get into this whole little entrepreneurial way of thinking about people and place. And of course, Sylvie began to say to me, first time enlightened leader at that point, you know, Andrew, I've got a basket case of the council. I've got all these politicians running around playing politics. Most of them have never run anything either. And that actually, we need to turn this around. How do I do it? I said, Sylvie, you find 6 people. You find the 6 officers who get what this is about, and you promote them. You reward them. You point to them. Not about age, not how long they've been there. It's about mindset. Andrew, that 3 acres of derelict land behind your building where they're injecting on that, how about this deal? I'll give you it for £1 for 30 years. Used to be a lung of London, beautiful park. It's now a complete mess, tarmacked over. But we've been so-called managing for years. Done. And by the way, if you can run nurseries better than we can, how about that nursery on the Isle of Dogs that's a bit of a basket case? Why don't you run that? You've gained capability. Because by the way, you're not virtuous just because you're in the voluntary sector. Yeah? You've got to be good at what you do. And if you're not any good, why should we employ you? You know, it's a level playing field. If you're as good as the state or business, fine. But if you're not, a relationship began to happen. And as we were actually, loads of our stuff started with no money, just as starting to do it. See, waiting on grants is a complete waste of time. You'll never get there. Just start doing what you think is the right thing. So we began to realise this massive dependency culture we had when Janet moved the dance school on the church hall. We had a bit of strip of land on our building before we got the park land. We just started doing the community care thing. No money, just an idea. Start with money follows ideas. It follows people who get out of bed on a Monday morning. I work with Tanny Gray-Thompson. I know what that's about. And I know what the Olympics is about, so I'm involved in it. And what we celebrated on the Olympics, to be honest with you, is that the world isn't fair and equal. We celebrated people, some of them very, very disabled, who got out of bed on a Monday morning and went for it. They didn't only get out of bed on a Monday morning, they got out of bed on a Tuesday morning, and on a Wednesday morning, and on a Thursday. And when everyone else was asleep, Tanny Gray-Thompson was out on the road to Newcastle. Yeah? And eventually there came a point in front of all the world where history was made. It's like that, folks. The world isn't equal and fair. It is about individuals who get out of bed on a Monday morning. We began to get out of bed on a Monday morning with Sue and with some other individuals on this housing estate, and we began to create a culture that was entrepreneurial and that was going for it. And what did that mean? Well, as we grew a little community care programme with no money, Billy Cannon pops up. Who's Billy Cannon? Well, actually he's a 28-year-old with epilepsy, so once every 6 years, you know, he gets epilepsy, can't get a job on a building site. So his life's wasted away, his family's getting ill, relationships in his marriage difficult, but actually had a passion for gardening. And one day he came to me, as he's working on this little land in front of the church, and said, Andrew, I'd really like to plant a meadow on that park. I looked in his eyes and thought, Billy, you have a passion for that actually. We now control that land, we've done the deal. So I'm going to give you a shovel and a wheelbarrow and a pick and get on with it. Not an equal opportunities policy in the Guardian, where we competing with some 18-year-old, you know, did a course on gardening somewhere but can't hold a shovel. You know, no, Billy. Billy begins to rip up all the tarmac, gets the soil in, lays the seeds, a meadow appears. Also, what you notice happening is all the kids that began to set it on fire realise that Billy's now in charge, and he's a very big bloke, and there's some very interesting messages going about ownership and leadership, and who's in charge of what. We began, if you follow that through, you create a landscape business called Dream Dreams, and you end up partnering, by the way, with G4S, who you get to know, actually. And they point out they've got 26 sites and not quite sure what to do with it, because we've now got the whole social enterprise that is gearing up. We can then partner with them, and you end up on 26 sites, and they began to discover stuff from us, and we learn stuff from them, and eventually you put a whole bid together for £35 million, and you build 14 health centres together. But it still begins with Bob Taylor and a bloke, and you get to know each other, and you're credible because of what you do, not what you talk about, or not your God-given right as the voluntary sector. There is no right. You have a right by what you do, not by who you are. This culture began to happen in Bromley by Bow. Today, Bromley by Bow Centre has about 160 staff. There are 62 businesses. We're on 25 sites across East London. We built the first integrated model of primary health care 20 years ago following the death of a woman called Jean Byles in a baby P scenario, and challenging the religion of health inequalities in the NHS is crap. It's about the lowest common denominator. The NHS is imploding. I'm sorry, I've had Jeremy Hunt with me the other week. He isn't running the NHS. He's not in charge of anything. There is no one running the NHS. Stop kidding ourselves. There's a serious problem of leadership in an organisation that is too big and full of liberal 1970s religion that doesn't work for patients. I know, my mum's been in hospital the other week, she's 97. They gave her cold soup after not feeding her for 14 hours. That is not customer care. We built the first integrated model of primary health care out of Jean's death and a serious crisis, and pointed out to the NHS that 50% of the patients that come into our health centre do not have a biomedical problem. They have an unemployment problem, a housing problem, an education problem. That is a very expensive health service, and none of our GPs or health people have noticed. Our health centres today, we have 40,000 patients, 4 health centres, probably the biggest listed in London. It's more like John Lewis. Lots of choices when you come in. Yeah, not just health's only a small bit of it. Human beings are more than biomedical machines. Of course, around that we built a business logic that now makes money that puts us back into the situation. Bromley by Bow began in a place to build relationships with people, business, assets, opportunity. We didn't go with needs, we went with opportunity and spread its tentacles. We have 2,000 visitors a year, and by the way, we charge them. So that actually we think our knowledge has value, because actually that creates an income stream that we can put a place, a street. 2007, I went into the House of Lords and was asked to go there, and I was getting older and didn't want to manage 150 people. You can get younger people better at it than you, so why not get them? I was at that point rung up, created a little business to try and engage with the public sector and business to do more of this innovation stuff. And I was called in by Christine Gilbert, the then Chief Executive of Town. So you know, Andrew, on St Paul's Way, just 800 yards to the north of Canary Wharf, a young man's been set on fire in the murder, and it's all appearing in the press. What do we do about it? I'm really concerned. Will you spend a day down there and tell me what on earth is going on? I went there. You had, despite the Blair years, the rhetoric of joined up thinking and joined back. All right, rhetoric. You know what you notice is all these policy documents from Dennis. I provide the office space to Dennis. They're all bright young things, but never built anything in their lives, full of ideology. There's loads of these think tanks. I met the 23-year-olds in Downing Street. I was at dinner with them the other week. They're bright young things, but I wouldn't give them any money. You know. You begin to get into this question of this street. Policy documents coming into Tower Hamlets Council. Any of these officers have never done any joined up stuff. They have no experience of it. They've been living in silos. They create a new committee structure. They change their names on their doors because they want to keep their jobs. And actually they do the same old stuff really, and no innovation really happens. So I said, Christine, that's what's going on here. There's a real opportunity on this one street to radically do something different. But Christine and I arrive, and there's the police outside with blue lights and West Indian boys with dogs. There's a head teacher behind the fence smoking and looking very sweaty. He's going to have a heart attack any time now. There's a failing school. There's 8 socialist workers playing games in that school with children's education. Next door is a health centre with 11,000 patients, with a white estate there, a Bengali estate here, Asian GPs there, George Galloway playing politics down there, and the health service petrified to do anything because it might be seen as racism, challenging tuition GPs. I think there's probably some very dodgy stuff going on there, but I can't prove it. There's Atul Patel across the road, the pharmacist, fantastic bloke, came here at 10 years of age, thrown out of Uganda by Idi Amin, but none of your documents mentioned him. The patients love him, he's been there 20 years. He's already inspiring 2 girls from the school who are Bengali to become pharmacists because he's fantastic on health. Teachers don't want to know him because they think he's a terrible business person. They never met him. And by the way, he's the other side of these fences. And there's Father Duncan on the end of the street, an Anglican priest, keeps hiding because his flat keeps getting broken into. Really nice guy. But none of it joined up, none of it connected. Oh my, Andrew, what can we do about this? So I actually nowadays run a manor house in the Cotswolds, which we turn a charity into a social enterprise, and we take people there. So I'll take 16 people. You know, the resident leader, the head teacher, the pharmacist, you know, your director of children's service. Let's just see what we come up with. They all arrive with their papers and mobile phones. Put your papers and mobile phones away. Let's just get the wine out and have a meal together, shall we? Let's just get to know each other as people. After 2 days of facilitation, unanimous agreement. This is an opportunity to build a street, a village together. None of us can solve the scale of these difficulties and transform this situation on our own. This is an opportunity to create a campus and wonder about innovation, the connection between a school, a failing health centre, communities at war. I go back to Christine, and Christine said, Andrew, you seem to have got a unanimous agreement. How do we create the St. Paul's Way transformation project? At which point I said, stop. Christine, I have spent 25 years of my life at this point in the middle of these housing estates, and I have seen government in its many forms coming through. Government is like a snake. You have Mrs. Thatcher's policies, then it's John Major's, then it's Tony, then it's Gordon, then it's Dave and Nick. Who is it now? No, it's Dave, you know, and the bright young thing minister stays for 6 months with his latest bright idea, no longer. And none of them watch the cumulative effect of over 40 years of all that taxpayers' investment that has created poverty and a social and economic disaster. So, Christine, if you want me to direct this transformation project, because it is about being bold, and it is about individuals, and it is about leadership, then I'm going to put a line right through that snake, and I'm going to follow none of it. And I'm going to pick off whatever I can from those funding streams, and we're going to build the road as we walk it with these local residents. And I am going to get out of bed on a Monday morning, and I'm going to ask you all, you and all who runs the health service, some really awkward questions, because I'm going to focus on this dysfunctional housing estate and these people. And the second thing, if you want to do transformation, Christy, is we have to get the top, the middle and the bottom of your organisation, the health service and the housing company to buy into a common narrative. Otherwise, what happens, and we've all watched this game before with the public sector, is all the directors get very excited about an idea, the middle management who've never done it before say it can't be done, and the people trying to create transformation on the street are confused. And it doesn't work, and everybody moves on, and the culture goes like this. Andrew, I have just appointed a new director of children's services called Kevin Collins. Go and see him. If he agrees, I agree. So I go see Kevin, and I said to Kevin, Kevin, you can create whatever structures, whatever processes you want. It will not make the slightest bit of difference in St. Paul's Way. It's about people and relationships, fundamentally it's body. You know what, Andrew? I agree. Come with your little action plan into my room, and I'll get the chief exec of the housing company and all of them from the NHS, and we'll sit there. We gather. Director of Primary Care says, can I be honest in this room? Yeah. I think there's some dodgy stuff going on in that health centre, but I can't prove it. If I dig in and it appears in the press, are we all going to stick together? Absolutely. 3 months later, he rings me up and says, Andrew, they bought a cheap fridge from B&Q. They've kept 10,000 injection swabs over the last 3 years at the wrong temperature. And they've injected 10,000 dead illegal injections into Bengali patients on the Burdett estate. You can imagine some of you what kicks in at that point, the beginnings of transformation of the health centre, which we eventually take responsibility for. At that point, Kevin Collins, the Director of Children's Services, Andrew, I'm going to take on those socialist workers in the school. And we're going to get really hot. I'm going to remove the governing body because they're overwhelmed with all this politics going on. And I'm going to create an interim executive board. Will you sit on it? Absolutely. We set up a board, we bring some business people on it. We begin to drive the situation. We appoint Graham Price as head teacher, a fantastic leader, and he begins to drill into the staff and remind the staff that the core business of this school is children, strangely enough. What does that look like when you open that little box in a lot of detail? Well, you managed to raise £40 million because you grabbed some stuff through the BSF programme. You have to remove 32 staff, slowly manage the situation. You discover there's bullying going on in the staff room, and you have to liberate some women staff who are fantastic into leadership roles, actually, to manage it properly. 5.5 years ago, that school was in the bottom 10% in the country. It had only 35 families applying to it. A year ago, we got outstanding in every regard by Ofsted. This year, we've had 1,200 families apply to it. 5 years ago, Brian Cox and I began doing a science summer school there, focused on how Britain becomes the best place to do science and engineering in the world. Why? Well, actually, we began to make our luck, so science becomes the important thing to get the school going, and I texted some Bengali girls to an event in the House of Lords on science. And actually, I came across Brian by chance, and we ended up talking. He said, Andrew, you know, number 10 sort of got interested in me, because I'm sort of interested in how Britain becomes the best place to do science and technology in the world, because the future jobs of our children rely on the answer to that question. We're short of 1 million engineers. And they all say yes, 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 and nothing happens. I laughed. I've been in number 10. None of the levers are connected. I've looked under the carpet. Entrepreneurs get busy. Between your council, yeah? Are the levers really connected? Or you're busy playing politics? Actually, Brian, come and have a look what we're doing. He looks at Bromley by Bow, the beginnings of this street. He says, Andrew, you are building integrated communities. This is the future of science. This is what we're discovering at CERN. It's not the biology silo, the chemistry silo, the physics. It's about that. Brian, let's explore becoming the best place to do science and technology in the world in this failing housing estate. Let's start here, find 1 million engineers. Well, last year we did our 4th. The chief scientist from NASA, a woman, turned up. 10 top scientists. We had Joe Johnson, the science minister, open it. 20 other schools. And the whole little thing that we're now doing with the new £16 million health centre. We've got a diabetes epidemic going on with 16 young Bengalis talking about DNA and the whole research thing they're doing on diabetes. Yeah? Fantastic presentation on the Olympic Park for 20 other schools. This year, we're about to go national on the Olympic Park, and we're going to invite schools all over the country. Will schools get out of bed on a Monday morning come? I have no idea, but we'll write on that, and Brian and I meet for coffee tomorrow to decide how we're going to do that. Because you see, he's not only a scientist, he's also an entrepreneur. Yeah? His question to me is, how did we get people alive down back to the moon? It wasn't 140,000 academics and those reports, yeah? The public sector so often listens to, no. That isn't how you got alive to the moon and back. 140,000 engineers worrying about metal, spaceships, glass, practical stuff, learning by doing culture, not learning by living in our heads. St Paul's Way has built a £16 million health centre. We're about to take 11,000 patients across the road. We've built a £1 million science complex, not in the school, but in the health centre across the road, with all this DNA and other research linked to the science curriculum. The science summer school inspiration event once a year is connected directly into the curriculum of the school. It is connected to small business development. We now have, I'm about to go tonight to JP Morgan, a whole business and entrepreneurial venture going on in the school now. Dependency housing estate, young people building small businesses, really fascinating things people are coming up with. People doing it in their bedroom, have any of us noticed? How many of us in the voluntary sector really know what's going on in this generation of young people? Yeah? How many of us really know? This is a very different culture emerging here. And we built the first phase of 500 homes. What did I find with the houses? 54 schemes, £3 million spent, not a flat bill. Every man and his dog had an opinion about this housing, apart from women with rats running through their kitchen. And because I took leadership, I could say, stop this process. I am not interested in the disability lobby, the environmental lobby, and all these people with opinions about the development of this flat, or the leader mayor of London who wants 50% social housing, so all the business plan collapses and nothing gets built. The only opinion that really counts here are residents with rats running through their kitchens. Their opinion counts above any other opinion. I got to Bob Kerslake down there, and actually running the Homes and Communities Agency said, you know, Andrew, you're building a place in the Community Housing Association, you should be doing this all over the country. I said, they should, but they're not. They're building mediocre housing, and they've become very much like local authority housing departments that we got rid of 30 years ago to try and do innovation. The state got involved and it drilled it all downwards. Actually, what we built was a housing company that didn't join that is actually a business controlled by residents and now has a £2.5 billion housing regeneration programme in Poplar. And didn't say, let's do a housing development in Essex and one in Poplar. No, we'll focus relentlessly on Poplar for 30 years and wonder about the connection between housing, education, business and enterprise. And by the way, if you give residents, not representatives, all that nonsense, if you give best residents control of the budget and the money, you get really, really real about what all that is about. A place, a street, and how did the Olympics happen? Well, it happened with a guy called Richard Sumray, actually, who you've never heard of. It wasn't Tessa, it wasn't Seb, I was there. And it happened around a table in Bromley by Bow 17 years ago. And he was a bit like the John the Baptist of the Olympic movement, who dared to believe that actually this thing could come to London. And he came to see me and someone called Paul Buckell, who was running a regeneration company we were building at the time, who is now the director of regeneration and community partnerships on Olympic Park, and I chair that bit of the board. And he said, you know, I think we should go for London. And we began to talk about it. And I said, do you know something, Richard? If you know anything about this area, no one's joining the dots. This is a water city here in East London. If we know about our rich history, this is the 6.5 miles of waterways of the Royal Docks that all become derelict. What would happen if in our heads we began to wonder about the connection between what's happening on the O2 at that point and the developments in the Royal Docks, which is probably now going to be bigger than Canary Wharf? Or the business district emerging at Canary Wharf, which now is going to double in size. Or now the £3.7 billion a bit further north in Canning Town development. And all now this development of residents in Poplar. What if we joined the dots? Because if you fly into City Airport and look down, you see the 6.5 miles of waterways from above. It's like Venice. But no one's joined the dots, not even the Mayor of London, because his colleagues at, out in the Tower Bridge, they have no idea what's going on out here. Let us as local leaders get hold of this. I went to see Richard Rogers. So Richard, is this a bonkers idea? No, Andrew, this is exactly right. I'll join you. Mike Davis will just put this together. We wrote the first document. Finger in the air, have a guess. I've been bold, yeah? No money, no idea, have a go, it might be the right thing to do. Well, actually, I'm now taking 9 Pathfinder projects we're building in the north of England, Liverpool, Sheffield, etc. All across all this. They come in, if you go down, take your kids. This amazing piece of city emerging in the Olympic Park. How's it emerging? Forget process. It's been about leadership. It's been about Sir Robin Wales, the Mayor of Newham, telling his Labour Party that I'm going to do business with business. It's been about driving together with business, some of us in the social enterprise sector who care about East London, being on that case every minute of every day for 17 years. It's about a handful of people, really, who brought many other people to the party. But being very clear what the vision is. We've just done a £2 billion deal. You might have seen it, Boris calls it Olympicopolis. Difficult to say if you've got false teeth. But actually, it's like the early Bromley by Bow. It's 400 million of investment from UCL Science Research, not student housing, research. V&A, Arts and Crafts, Sadler's Wells, Smithsonian from New York, creatives coming together and now beginning to transfer with the London College of Fashion cosmetic industry courses into our schools, which are looking at a major industry, marketing, the science of cosmetics, all together in schools. That is a business and entrepreneurial environment, because we all realise, as does Sir Robin Wales, that we're about jobs and skills and opportunities for our children. A place, a street, a piece of city. I have been all over the country and I know that there are these individuals I have found in Bromley by Bow, in Bradford, in Glasgow, here in Newcastle. But how many of our systems are looking for these individuals with passion? We all have passion. But what is it that really drives us? And can we find that? And can we get behind it? The world is changing. Watch our television. As Martha Lane Fox said to me the other week, the internet is the defining principle of our age. If that is true and for our children, not for us but for our children, that is going to be about, as part of my speech last night in Europe, lots more entrepreneurial activity. He who dares or she wins. It's going to be like that. And those who don't dare will fall away and the world will reinvent itself around us. We are human beings. We are made in the image of God. We have creative and passionate potential. But it's not about consult the residents, have we got a management committee in place? No, it's not about committees, it's about teams. Some principles, just visually. It's about looking for individuals. It doesn't matter whether in the public sector, the voluntary sector, or the bit who want to do stuff, and building teams around them. Not teams of representatives. You're not representing anyone. Teams of people who want to do that piece of business and make it work. It's about the phone call, the email. It's about teams, not committees. It is definitely about going for quality. So if you're going to go for stuff, you go for that. Because if you go for that, you'll get that. If you go for that, which I fear so many charities often do, you get that. And no one's persuaded. Yeah? Our children are watching television. They can see what the choices are. You have to go for that. It is about taking risks, I'm afraid. It is about the great celebration of the Olympics is the clue. It's not about whether you're able-bodied or disabled. By the way, we're all a bit disabled now. We've all got problems now or whatever. It's not just a physical thing. You know, but I have worked with Tessa Sanderson, I have worked with Tanny. They're both amazing people. And actually you see through the whole Olympic thing, it's not about physically what you've got, it's about what's going on in your head. And wasn't that an extraordinary thing to see all of that? What a challenge to all of us that say, oh, we can't do this, it's also very difficult. What? What are we talking about? It is about what is going on between our ears. The potential of the world around us, everywhere, is always full of possibilities. I remember in the very early days of Bromley Barbara, and I'll finish with this, a person coming to see me said, you seem to be throwing everything up in the air. I said, John, do you know something? The problem with you is you think it's all landed. It's all in the air. Because I began to notice our children playing in our nursery. There were little dressing up boxes they played around the church, because liturgy in church is about play. It's about imagining a world that doesn't exist. You know, it's like this. And one minute they put a costume, they could be a doctor. Next minute they were grocers. Next minute, they knew as children, they know that they can be many things. They're dressing up. The trouble with us adults, oh, we've tried that before, that didn't work. Oh, this is all very difficult. Not true. That tells you about your experience and your life expectancy about the world, what you expect to happen. Our children remind us about the truth about the world. The world is full of possibility for those who dare to believe and those who dare to get out of bed on a Monday morning, or on a Tuesday morning, or on a Wednesday morning, and go for it. And if I was wondering about your future here in a fast-changing world in which we now live in, it seems to we were just talking, I'm working with lots of people who've been with the army and just coming out of the army, really fantastic people. Why? Because they've done stuff in really serious places. Sometimes at 22, I've noticed people at 22 can be very, very mature, but I've never been there. But I assume when you've been in Afghanistan and Iraq, you get mature pretty quickly, actually. There's some serious issues. You know, actually, it's about those kinds of mindset. And what I've also discovered with many of our young people in Bromley like Burrs, when you create an entrepreneurial culture, which is all about doing, all about ownership, all about getting there, the children around us start to get it, and a culture begins to happen. But I'm afraid they're not sitting on management committees, they're not filling out grant forms, they're playing a game which is about entrepreneurship and innovation and going with their passions. They're beginning to do business together, not actually compete around filling forms. Give me my grant, otherwise nothing can happen. Money follows ideas. It follows people who get out of bed on a Monday morning. Thank you very much.